Sometimes the safest place in the forest is beside the creature everyone else fears. The first rays of morning slipped through the towering pines as Evelyn Carter followed the narrow trail leading to the creek, her worn leather bucket swinging gently at her side. Mist drifted over the water like silver ribbons, softening the edges of the quiet wilderness that had become her only true home. The people in Ash Hollow always warned her never to wander this deep into Blackwood Forest. They whispered about glowing eyes between the trees, about a massive black wolf that appeared without leaving tracks, a beast older than the oldest legends, one that watched travelers in complete silence before disappearing like a shadow swallowed by dawn. Evelyn had heard every frightening story since childhood, yet none of them frightened her nearly as much as the loneliness waiting inside her tiny cabin each evening. She knelt beside the creek, letting the icy water run through her fingers. It was early spring, and the current carried the scent of cedar, moss, and fresh rain. This hidden place belonged to no one else. Here, no pack members mocked the quiet Omega who lived beyond the village fences. Here, no one reminded her that she had been forgotten. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, listening to birds singing somewhere high above, until a faint rustle echoed from the tree line behind her. Every sound in the forest suddenly seemed to pause. Even the breeze became still. Slowly, Evelyn turned her head. Standing only a few yards away was the largest wolf she had ever seen. His coat was darker than midnight, absorbing the morning light instead of reflecting it. Powerful shoulders rose and fell with slow, measured breaths, while golden eyes rested not on her, but somewhere beyond her, searching the dense woods behind the creek. She should have run. Every story demanded it. Every instinct whispered the same warning. Yet something about the wolf refused to match the monster people described. His posture held no hunger, no threat, only quiet vigilance. Evelyn remained perfectly still, her heartbeat loud in her own ears. The wolf did not growl. He did not move closer. Instead, his ears twitched toward the distant forest as though he had heard something she could not. A branch snapped far away. The wolf shifted his weight ever so slightly, placing himself between Evelyn and the unseen sound without taking his eyes off the trees. Her breath caught. He was not watching her. He was watching over her. The realization settled gently inside her heart before she could explain it. For several endless seconds, neither of them moved. Then the distant noise faded, carried away by the wind, and the wolf relaxed almost imperceptibly. His gaze finally met hers. There was intelligence there, startling and unmistakable, so deep that Evelyn felt as though another soul had silently greeted her across the narrow stream. Without thinking, she offered the smallest smile. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure why the words escaped her lips. The wolf blinked once, almost thoughtfully, before turning his head back toward the forest. High above the treetops, hidden from every living soul, another pair of unseen eyes watched the silent meeting unfold, and for the first time in many years, the ancient balance of Blackwood Forest shifted ever so slightly beneath the rising sun. The village could not decide whether the black wolf was a guardian or a curse, but every new rumor sounded darker than the last. Some claimed they had seen glowing eyes beyond their fences during heavy storms. Others insisted the enormous creature had crossed frozen rivers without leaving a single footprint. Evelyn Carter listened to every story with quiet patience while gathering bread from the baker or filling her basket at the market, yet none of those frightened whispers matched the silent presence she had encountered beside the creek. During the following week, she returned to the forest every morning with the same simple routine, expecting the mysterious animal to have vanished forever like a dream carried away by daylight. Instead, she caught glimpses of him everywhere. Sometimes she noticed a dark silhouette standing atop a distant ridge before disappearing behind towering pines. Sometimes she discovered fresh deer tracks circling away from the narrow path she always walked, as though something larger had guided the wildlife in another direction. Once, after an afternoon shower, she slipped on wet stones crossing a shallow stream, but before she lost her balance completely, she felt an unexpected calm settle over the woods. Looking up, she found the black wolf standing only a few yards away, watching the forest instead of her. Somehow his quiet presence steadied her racing heart, and she carefully found her footing again without another stumble. It became an unspoken pattern neither of them acknowledged. He never approached close enough to invade her space. She never attempted to follow him into the deeper wilderness. They simply existed within the same stretch of forest, separated by respectful distance and an invisible understanding neither could explain. One cool afternoon, Evelyn carried a small loaf of homemade oat bread in her basket. She paused beside a moss-covered stone and gently placed half of it there before continuing toward the creek. She did not call for him. She did not expect anything in return. It simply felt wrong to receive silent kindness without offering a little kindness back. When she glanced over her shoulder several minutes later, the bread was gone, yet the wolf remained hidden among the trees. A faint smile warmed her face. The next morning, she found something waiting near the same stone. Fresh wild blueberries rested neatly upon a broad green leaf, untouched by birds or squirrels. Evelyn laughed softly under her breath. "Is this your way of saying thank you?" she asked the empty forest. Somewhere beyond the trees came the quiet rustle of leaves, followed by complete silence once more. High above, concealed within the thick canopy, golden eyes watched every gentle exchange. Lucian Ashford, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, remained perfectly still beneath the ancient branches. For weeks, he had investigated troubling signs near the borders of his kingdom, expecting to uncover smugglers or trespassers. Instead, he had found an Omega who greeted fear with compassion and answered mystery with trust. Every instinct urged him to remain hidden. Every royal duty demanded distance. Yet with each passing sunrise, he found himself returning to the same creek before she arrived, making certain no unseen danger reached her first. Even though she never realized the silent guardian she thanked each morning carried the weight of an entire kingdom upon his unseen shoulders. Several more peaceful days passed before the forest whispered its first warning. Evelyn Carter noticed it the moment she reached the creek. Fresh footprints pressed into the damp soil where no one from the village ever walked. They were human, larger than her own, and they circled the clearing before disappearing into the thicker woods. She slowly looked around. The birds had fallen strangely quiet. Even the gentle current seemed softer than usual. She knelt beside the water, touching one of the prints with careful fingers. It was recent. Someone had been watching this hidden place. A cool breeze carried the familiar scent of pine, followed by the faint rustle she had come to recognize. The black wolf stepped silently from between the towering trees, his dark coat blending so perfectly with the shadows that he seemed to appear from the forest itself. His golden eyes never settled on Evelyn. Instead, they swept across the surrounding woods with calm, unwavering focus. She stood and brushed the dust from her skirt before offering him the same gentle smile she had worn every morning since they first met. "You noticed them too, did not you?" she asked softly. The wolf remained still. One ear turned toward the distant ridge while the other stayed alert to every sound surrounding the clearing. Whatever had left those footprints was gone now. Yet the feeling of being observed lingered in the cool spring air. Evelyn looked toward the quiet creek. She had carried 2 heavy buckets nearly half a mile through the forest, and there would not be enough daylight to make another trip before evening. Returning home without washing meant another long night covered in dust from gathering herbs and tending her small vegetable garden. She hesitated, glancing once more toward the mysterious guardian who had never once betrayed her trust. Somehow the decision felt simple. Taking one cautious step closer, she stopped several feet away so she would not frighten him. "I have something to ask you," she whispered, almost embarrassed by how unusual it sounded. The wolf slowly lifted his head, meeting her eyes with the same quiet intelligence that always made her forget she was looking at a wild creature. Evelyn smiled again, warmer this time. "Would you stay here and watch the forest while I wash? I know that sounds silly, but I think you understand exactly what I mean." For one long heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the wolf calmly walked past her without making the slightest threatening movement. He positioned himself between the creek and the deeper forest, facing away from the water. His broad shoulders remained perfectly still as his sharp gaze searched every shadow beyond the clearing. It was as though he had accepted a responsibility without needing another word. Evelyn could not stop the grateful laugh that escaped her lips. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I knew I could trust you." Hidden beneath thick black fur, Lucian Ashford closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Those 6 simple words struck harder than any challenge he had ever faced. She trusted him completely without knowing his name, his rank, or the dangerous power sleeping beneath his borrowed form. No court had ever offered him such unquestioning faith. No alliance had ever carried such quiet weight. As Evelyn moved carefully toward the peaceful creek behind him, Lucian fixed his attention on the endless sea of trees before them. Every instinct demanded perfect discipline. Every heartbeat reminded him that the greatest strength a king could possess was not power over others, but power over himself. Somewhere far beyond the clearing, unseen branches shifted once again, and his golden eyes narrowed ever so slightly as the peaceful morning prepared to reveal its next secret. Lucian Ashford remained as motionless as the ancient pines surrounding the clearing, every muscle held beneath perfect control while the quiet sounds of the creek drifted behind him. He deliberately kept his eyes fixed on the forest ahead, refusing even the smallest glance over his shoulder. For centuries, Alpha Kings had been taught that true authority came from discipline before dominance, and in that silent moment, he understood the lesson more deeply than ever before. Evelyn Carter had entrusted her safety to a creature every other person feared. She had offered that trust freely, without bargaining for protection, without demanding proof, without even knowing who or what he truly was. It settled upon his heart with a weight no royal crown had ever carried. The breeze shifted gently through the branches, bringing with it the clean scent of spring rain, wildflowers, and fresh cedar. Mixed within it lingered the unmistakable presence of the quiet Omega behind him, not as temptation, but as a reminder of the extraordinary faith she had placed in him. Lucian drew one slow breath and anchored every instinct exactly where it belonged. His duty was simple: guard the clearing, protect the one who believed in him. Nothing else mattered. A squirrel darted across a fallen log several yards ahead, and one of his ears turned instinctively toward the movement before relaxing again. Moments later, a pair of deer emerged cautiously from the underbrush. They froze upon noticing the massive black wolf standing watch. Instead of fleeing in panic, they calmly adjusted their path and disappeared deeper into the woods. Even the animals sensed something unusual. The predator before them had no interest in hunting. His entire attention remained fixed upon preserving the peace surrounding the creek. Behind him came the gentle splash of water against smooth stones, followed by the soft sound of humming. Evelyn was singing to herself, barely louder than the whispering breeze. She was completely at ease. Lucian had stood before rival kings, negotiated fragile alliances, and commanded warriors whose loyalty had been forged over decades. Yet nothing had ever felt as overwhelming as hearing someone relax completely simply because he was nearby. The realization unsettled him in ways no battlefield ever could. Far beyond the clearing, another faint sound drifted between the trees. A distant footstep, too careful to belong to ordinary wildlife. Lucian immediately focused on the source. His posture changed almost imperceptibly as every royal instinct sharpened. Whoever had left the footprints earlier had not wandered far. They were still somewhere within the forest, hidden beyond sight. The black wolf took 2 silent steps forward, placing himself even farther between the unseen presence and the peaceful creek behind him. His broad frame blocked the narrow approach completely. The hidden observer never appeared. Minutes passed beneath the warming sun until the unfamiliar scent gradually faded with the changing wind. Only then did Lucian allow the tension in his shoulders to ease. He remained facing the trees until he heard Evelyn's light footsteps approach across the grass. "I think we are safe now," she said softly, speaking to him as though they had shared countless conversations before. "You kept every promise without saying a single word." Lucian slowly turned to face her. She smiled with quiet gratitude, unaware that those simple words echoed through the heart of the Alpha King far more powerfully than any formal oath ever spoken inside the great halls of his kingdom. And for the first time in many lonely years, the burden of wearing an invisible crown no longer felt quite so heavy. The following morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale blue, but the peaceful rhythm that had settled between Evelyn Carter and the silent black wolf felt different from the moment she stepped onto the familiar trail. The forest seemed to be listening. Even the cheerful birds paused more often than they sang, and the gentle wind carried scents that changed too quickly to belong to an ordinary spring day. Evelyn tightened her grip on the basket resting against her hip. She had filled it with fresh herbs, homemade bread, and a small jar of honey she hoped to leave beside the moss-covered stone. As she reached the clearing, she immediately noticed the wolf already waiting near the edge of the trees. He stood perfectly still, yet his attention remained fixed far beyond the creek. When he heard her footsteps, one ear turned briefly toward her before returning to the distant woods. Evelyn smiled. "You came before I did today," she whispered. "It almost feels like you knew I would need a friend." She placed the basket on the ground and carefully arranged the small gifts upon the familiar stone. The wolf never moved toward them. Instead, he continued scanning the forest with unwavering focus. Only then did Evelyn notice the faint movement of nearby branches. It was subtle, almost invisible, but enough to disturb the peaceful silence surrounding the clearing. She looked toward the trees, wondering whether another deer had wandered close. Before she could take another step, the black wolf quietly shifted sideways until his broad frame rested between her and the unseen movement. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. His calm posture alone carried an unmistakable message that the path ahead was no longer open. Evelyn stopped immediately. She trusted his judgment without question. Several long moments passed before three unfamiliar travelers slowly emerged from the distant trail. They wore weathered cloaks and carried walking staffs, appearing no different from ordinary merchants crossing the northern forests. One of them offered Evelyn a polite smile. "Good morning," the stranger called. "We seem to have taken the wrong trail. Could you tell us which road leads toward Ash Hollow?" Evelyn instinctively prepared to answer, but before a single word left her lips, the black wolf calmly stepped one pace forward. He neither threatened nor charged. He simply stood with quiet authority, golden eyes fixed upon the visitors. Something changed in the travelers' expressions. Their confident smiles faded into uncertain silence. After exchanging uneasy glances among themselves, the leader gave a respectful nod. "Perhaps we should find another route," he said softly. Without another word, the three strangers turned around and disappeared back into the forest from which they had come. Evelyn watched until they were completely gone. "That was strange," she murmured. "They looked lost, but somehow you knew they should not come any closer." The wolf remained still until even their fading footsteps disappeared into the distance. Only then did he finally relax and glance toward her. Evelyn walked closer, stopping just beyond his reach. "Thank you," she said with genuine warmth. "You always seem to know when something is not quite right, even before I notice it myself." Hidden beneath the quiet strength of his dark form, Lucian Ashford understood that the travelers had not truly been searching for directions. Their questions had hidden careful curiosity, and their eyes had searched the clearing far more than the trail ahead. Yet what remained with him most was not the encounter itself, but the simple certainty shining in Evelyn's gentle smile. She had accepted his silent protection once again without fear, and with every passing day, the invisible bond growing between an ordinary Omega and an unseen king became stronger than either of them could possibly understand. Spring slowly surrendered to early summer, and the quiet rhythm of Blackwood Forest settled into something that felt almost sacred. Evelyn Carter no longer wondered whether she would find the great black wolf waiting near the creek each morning. Somehow he was always there. Sometimes he rested beneath the shade of an old cedar tree. Sometimes he stood on the ridge overlooking the water, watching the endless sea of green with patient eyes. He never asked for anything, yet he never truly left. Over time, Evelyn discovered herself speaking aloud without embarrassment, filling the peaceful silence with stories no one else had ever cared enough to hear. She spoke about the tiny vegetable garden behind her cabin and laughed about the stubborn rabbits that always seemed to outsmart her fences. She described the wildflowers blooming along the eastern trail and the bluebirds building a nest above her front porch. She even admitted that she had once dreamed of traveling beyond the northern mountains, although she doubted she ever would. The wolf never interrupted. He simply listened with quiet attention that somehow felt more genuine than any conversation she had shared with another person. One warm afternoon, she sat upon the smooth stone beside the creek, removing a loose thread from the sleeve of her simple dress while the wolf rested several feet away. "Everyone believes being alone eventually becomes easy," she said softly. "I do not think they are telling the truth. I think people simply become better at pretending they do not mind." The wolf slowly lifted his head, meeting her eyes. His expression remained impossible to read, yet she sensed understanding hidden behind those golden eyes. Evelyn smiled faintly. You probably understand loneliness better than anyone. Hidden beneath his dark coat, Lucian Ashford felt those words settle deep within his heart. For years he had carried the burdens of a kingdom without complaint. Every council meeting demanded certainty. Every royal decree required strength. Every noble expected perfection. Yet no one had ever asked whether the man beneath the crown grew weary of carrying it. Here, in this quiet clearing, none of those titles existed. Evelyn knew nothing about alpha kings, royal courts, or ancient responsibilities. She simply saw a silent companion who appeared whenever she needed one. As afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves, a gentle breeze carried several wild daisies across the grass. One delicate blossom landed near the wolf's front paws. Evelyn laughed quietly before walking closer. She carefully picked up the flower and held it toward him with both hands. "This belongs to you," she said with playful sincerity. "A guardian should receive a proper thank you every now and then." Lucian remained perfectly still as she tucked the tiny white blossom behind the thick fur near one ear. She stepped back, admiring her work before laughing once more. "There, now you look much friendlier than the stories say." If anyone from the royal court had witnessed the moment, they would never have believed it. The feared Alpha King of the Northern Territories, whose presence alone silenced crowded halls, stood quietly while a gentle Omega decorated him with a single wildflower. Lucian could have walked away. Instead, he remained exactly where he was, allowing the blossom to stay. Evelyn's laughter echoed softly across the creek, blending with birdsong and flowing water until the entire forest seemed brighter. High above them, sunlight filtered through the ancient branches, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Lucian realized he was no longer returning to this clearing because duty demanded it. He returned because somewhere between quiet conversations, shared silence, and simple acts of kindness, the lonely king had begun to treasure the peaceful little corner of the world where no one expected him to be anything more than a faithful guardian. The full moon rose earlier than usual, spilling silver light across Blackwood Forest until every branch shimmered with quiet mystery. Evelyn Carter noticed the change the moment she stepped outside her cabin. The air felt lighter, almost alive, carrying a strange stillness that wrapped itself around every familiar sound. She gathered a small lantern but never bothered to light it. The moon illuminated the narrow trail well enough, and somehow she felt certain the silent guardian would already be waiting. When she reached the creek, she found the black wolf standing upon the smooth stones near the water's edge. He looked different tonight. His dark coat glistened beneath the moonlight as though countless tiny stars had settled across his fur. Even from several yards away, Evelyn sensed an unusual tension surrounding him. His breathing remained steady, yet his golden eyes reflected a quiet conflict she had never seen before. "You seem tired," she said gently as she approached. "Have you been watching over this forest all day again?" The wolf lowered his head slightly, but did not move closer. Instead, he glanced toward the bright moon hanging above the trees before looking back at her. Evelyn followed his gaze and smiled. "It really is beautiful tonight." She sat upon the familiar stone beside the creek, folding her hands in her lap. "Sometimes I wonder if the moon watches lonely people a little longer than everyone else." The wolf remained perfectly still. Deep within him, Lucian Ashford felt the ancient magic woven into his royal blood awaken with growing intensity. Every full moon strengthened the bond between his human and wolf forms, and tonight the power surged more fiercely than ever before. He had intended to leave before moonrise, to avoid risking the fragile secret he had protected for so long. Yet when he imagined Evelyn arriving to an empty clearing, disappointment touching her gentle smile, he had stayed. Now the choice threatened to unravel before his eyes. A warm breeze swept across the creek. Silver light brightened until the entire clearing seemed to glow. Lucian closed his eyes, fighting the transformation that pressed against every part of his being. The ancient magic refused to remain hidden. Evelyn rose slowly, concern replacing her peaceful smile. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly. She took one careful step forward. "Please do not be afraid. I will not leave you." Her voice reached him with remarkable calm, becoming the final thread holding his discipline together. Then the moonlight intensified. Soft ribbons of silver surrounded the great wolf, not with violence or fear, but with the quiet grace of something ancient returning to its true form. Evelyn stopped breathing for a single astonished moment as the familiar silhouette slowly changed before her eyes. The massive black wolf faded into moonlit light, revealing a tall man standing where the guardian had been only seconds earlier. His dark hair stirred gently in the breeze, and his silver eyes carried the very same quiet kindness she had trusted for so many weeks. Neither of them spoke. The forest itself seemed unwilling to interrupt the silence. Evelyn searched his face, then looked into those unmistakable eyes once more. Recognition slowly replaced surprise. "It was always you," she whispered. The man inclined his head with quiet humility, as though no title in the world mattered within that peaceful clearing. Before he could find the words to explain the impossible truth, distant voices drifted faintly through the trees, reminding them both that dawn would soon bring far more than answers. The distant voices faded as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only the gentle murmur of the creek beneath the full moon. Evelyn Carter remained where she stood, her eyes never leaving the man before her. She searched his face for traces of the quiet guardian she had come to trust, and with every passing heartbeat, she found them. The calm silver eyes, the patient stillness, the quiet strength that had never once asked for recognition. Nothing about him felt unfamiliar except his human form. Lucian Ashford lowered his gaze for a brief moment before speaking, his voice deep yet remarkably gentle. "I owe you the truth." Evelyn listened without fear. Somehow, the fear she should have felt had already dissolved long before this night. "My name is Lucian," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The words settled softly into the silence instead of shattering it. Evelyn blinked once, absorbing the impossible confession. Every child in the North had heard stories about the Alpha King. Some described an untouchable ruler whose presence alone silenced great halls. Others imagined a warrior whose strength could change the fate of entire kingdoms. None of those stories resembled the quiet guardian who had accepted wildflowers with silent gratitude. "You," she whispered. "You stayed here all this time." Lucian nodded slowly. "I came to these woods searching for answers about disturbances along the border. I expected danger. Instead, I found someone who offered kindness without asking who deserved it." He looked toward the peaceful creek where so many quiet mornings had passed between them. "The day you asked me to guard the clearing, you believed in me without knowing my name. You trusted a creature everyone else feared." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Because you never gave me a reason not to." Those simple words carried more weight than any royal ceremony. Lucian drew a slow breath before continuing. "There was a moment when I nearly failed myself." Evelyn frowned slightly, waiting for him to explain. "Not because you asked too much of me," he said. "Because your trust reminded me how easily power can be misunderstood. A king commands loyalty every day. But trust can never be ordered. It can only be given. When you placed your safety in my care, I realized I valued that gift more than any crown I have ever worn." Evelyn felt unexpected tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from hearing someone who carried unimaginable responsibility speak with such quiet honesty. "I never saw a monster," she answered softly. "I only saw someone who kept showing up when I needed a friend." Lucian looked at her with an expression no member of his royal court had ever witnessed. The loneliness that had rested behind his eyes for years seemed lighter beneath the moon. "Then perhaps," he said with a gentle smile, "you are the first person who truly saw me." A cool breeze carried the scent of cedar through the clearing, stirring the leaves above them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood beside the creek where a frightened village girl and a hidden king had unknowingly changed each other's lives through nothing more extraordinary than quiet kindness and unwavering trust. Far beyond the trees, the first golden light of approaching dawn touched the eastern horizon, and with it came the distant sound of horses traveling toward Blackwood Forest, bringing a new chapter neither of them could stop from beginning. The first light of dawn spread across Blackwood Forest as a line of royal riders emerged between the towering pines, their silver cloaks catching the morning breeze. They slowed the moment they reached the quiet clearing beside the creek, and every one of them immediately lowered their heads in respectful silence. Not because of the forest, and not because of the rising sun, but because the man standing beside the water was their king. Evelyn Carter instinctively stepped back, suddenly realizing that the peaceful stranger she had trusted belonged to a world far greater than her own. Lucian Ashford noticed the hesitation in her eyes before she spoke a single word. "Nothing has changed," he said gently. "Not where it truly matters." An older knight dismounted and approached with careful respect. "Your Majesty, the council has searched for you throughout the night. They feared something terrible had happened." Lucian gave a calm nod before looking back toward Evelyn. "Nothing terrible happened," he replied. "Something extraordinary did." The knight followed his gaze, surprised to find an ordinary young woman standing beside the creek. Questions filled his expression, but years of loyal service kept him silent. Lucian stepped forward until he stood beside Evelyn once more. "This is Evelyn Carter," he said clearly enough for every rider to hear. She offered kindness when she expected nothing in return. She placed her trust in a lonely guardian long before she knew she stood beside a king. The clearing fell completely still. No one dared interrupt. Lucian removed the royal cloak resting across his shoulders and carefully placed it around Evelyn's shoulders with quiet respect. It was not a grand display of power. It was a simple gesture of gratitude. Evelyn looked at him with quiet surprise. "I do not know anything about palaces," she admitted softly. "I do not know how to stand before nobles or speak like royalty." Lucian smiled with the same warmth she had first seen reflected in the golden eyes of the black wolf. "The kingdom has enough people who understand ceremony," he answered. "What it needs are people who understand compassion." A gentle breeze stirred the trees as the morning sun climbed higher. The wildflower Evelyn had tucked behind the wolf's ear the day before now rested carefully inside Lucian's hand. He looked at the tiny white blossom before placing it inside the pocket over his heart. "This," he said quietly, "will always remind me of the place where I was valued for who I was instead of what I ruled." Evelyn felt the weight of uncertainty begin to lift from her heart. The grand stories told throughout the villages had described an untouchable alpha king whose strength inspired awe. Yet the man before her had shown that the greatest strength was choosing kindness when no one expected it. Together they turned toward the forest path leading beyond the creek. The royal riders respectfully made room without speaking. No one questioned the king's decision because every person present had witnessed something far greater than rank or tradition. They had witnessed trust freely given and humbly honored. As Evelyn walked beside Lucian toward the waiting horses, she looked back one final time at the peaceful clearing that had quietly changed both of their lives. The creek continued flowing beneath the morning sun. The birds welcomed another new day. And somewhere deep within Blackwood Forest, the silence carried a timeless reminder that true strength is gentle, trust is never earned through fear, and sometimes the greatest love story begins not with a crown, but with a simple act of believing in someone when the rest of the world only saw a beast.